Lightning tore across the black sky as Elena Marsh stumbled through the freezing wind, her boots sinking into wet snow with every step. Her breath came in ragged clouds. Somewhere behind her, a branch cracked like a gunshot, and she spun around, heart hammering, certain something was watching her from the trees. She had not planned to be out here. An hour ago, she had been driving home from the animal clinic, where she volunteered 3 nights a week, her headlights cutting through a light drizzle that had turned, without warning, into a violent mountain storm. The road had washed out near Miller's Pass, forcing her to leave her car and continue on foot toward the ranger station she remembered from a hiking trip years ago. That decision, made in a moment of panic, was about to change her entire life. A thin, high-pitched whimper cut through the howling wind. Elena froze. It was not the wind. It was not an animal she recognized from any documentary or textbook. It was smaller, weaker, more desperate. She turned toward the sound, squinting into the darkness. Her flashlight beam trembled as she swept it across the tree line, and then she saw it, a small gray shape half buried in snow beneath a fallen log, shivering uncontrollably. Elena's training as a veterinary volunteer kicked in before her fear could stop her. She dropped to her knees despite the cold soaking through her jeans and reached toward the shape. It flinched, baring tiny teeth, but there was no real strength behind the gesture. It was a wolf cub, no more than a few weeks old, its fur matted with blood along one side. Hey, it's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm not going to hurt you." She had never handled a wild wolf cub before. She had read about them, admired photographs of them, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer fragility of the creature, now trembling in her palms. Its ribs pressed visibly against thin skin. Its breathing was shallow and uneven. Wherever its mother was, the cub had clearly been alone for hours, possibly longer. Elena's mind raced through the limited facts she knew. Wolves in this region did not simply abandon their young. Something had happened. Something bad. And that thought sent a fresh wave of unease crawling up her spine. Because if a mother wolf was missing, there was a reason, and that reason might still be out here in the dark with her. She pulled off her jacket without hesitation and wrapped the cub inside it, tucking it against her chest for warmth. The wind seemed to grow sharper the moment she exposed her arms, but she barely noticed. She had made her decision the instant she saw the small creature struggling to breathe. The ranger station, she remembered, was still nearly 2 miles away, across terrain she now could not fully see through the storm. 2 miles had never felt so impossible. She began walking, cradling the cub against her body, murmuring soft reassurances that were as much for herself as for the animal. The wind pushed against her like a wall, and twice she nearly lost her footing on the icy slope. Her legs burned. Her lungs ached from the cold air. But every time she thought about turning back, about waiting out the storm somewhere safer, she felt the cub's tiny heartbeat against her chest, frantic and fragile, and she kept moving. An hour passed, though it felt like an eternity. The storm did not weaken. If anything, it grew more violent, the wind driving sleet sideways into her face until she could barely keep her eyes open. Her flashlight beam grew dimmer as the batteries drained, and twice she stumbled over roots hidden beneath the snow, catching herself just before falling. It was during the third fall that her ankle twisted beneath her, and pain shot up her leg so sharply that she cried out despite herself. She lay in the snow for a moment, breathing hard, the cub whimpering weakly inside her jacket. "No," she said aloud, gritting her teeth. "Not yet, not now." She forced herself upright, testing the ankle. It held her weight, barely, sending sharp pulses of pain with every step, but it held. She kept moving, slower now, favoring her uninjured leg, using low branches to steady herself when the wind threatened to knock her sideways. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that she had wandered deep into territory that did not belong to any hiking trail or ranger district marked on human maps. It belonged to something else entirely, something ancient and hidden from the world she had grown up in. The wolves that called this land home were not ordinary wolves, and the cub, shivering against her chest, was not an ordinary orphan. It was the last surviving pup of a bloodline that mattered more than Elena could possibly imagine. Her strength was fading fast. The cold had crept past her skin and into her bones, numbing her fingers until she could barely feel them wrapped around the small bundle she carried. her vision blurred at the edges, sharpening only when she blinked hard against the sleet. She knew, somewhere in the rational part of her mind, that she was showing signs of hypothermia. She knew she needed shelter, warmth, rest. But every time she considered stopping, the image of the cub's ribs pressing against its skin flashed through her mind, and she pushed forward instead. She reached a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, their branches heavy with snow, and for a moment, the wind eased enough for her to catch her breath. She leaned against the nearest tree, chest heaving, and looked down at the cub cradled against her. Its eyes were closed now. Its breathing had slowed. "No, no, stay with me," Elena whispered, panic flooding through her exhaustion. She rubbed the cub gently through the fabric of her jacket, trying to coax warmth back into its small body. "Please, just a little longer. We're almost there." She was not, in truth, almost anywhere. The ranger station was still over a mile away, across terrain growing steeper and more treacherous with every step. But she told herself the lie anyway, because the alternative, accepting how far she still had to go, felt unbearable. She pushed off from the tree and continued walking, her steps growing shorter, more unsteady. Her ankles screamed with every stride. Her body, deprived of its jacket, shook uncontrollably, but she kept her arms wrapped tightly around the bundle at her chest, shielding it as best she could from the wind. It was somewhere near the edge of the clearing that her legs finally gave out. She did not fall dramatically. There was no cry, no sudden collapse. Her knees simply buckled beneath her, and she sank into the snow, her body no longer willing to obey the commands her mind kept sending. She curled forward instinctively, wrapping herself around the cub, using the last of her strength to shield it from the cold ground and the biting wind. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper now. "I tried." Her eyelids grew heavy. The howling wind began to sound distant, muffled, as though she were sinking underwater. She felt the cub stir weakly against her chest, a small sound of protest, and something in her refused to let go, even as consciousness slipped further away. The last thing Elena registered before darkness took her completely was a pair of eyes in the tree line, pale and glowing faintly in the storm's dim light, watching her with an intensity she was too far gone to understand. She did not see the massive shape step out from between the trees. She did not feel the ground tremble slightly beneath its weight. She did not know that the creature approaching her was not simply a wolf, but something far older, far more powerful, something that had been searching this exact stretch of forest for hours, with a growing, desperate urgency. Cale Ashbourne had been running through the storm since sundown, ever since the alarm had spread through his pack that the den holding his brother's litter had been attacked. He had arrived too late to save the parents. He had arrived too late to save most of the pups. All that remained of that bloodline, as far as any search had confirmed, was a single missing cub, small, injured, and alone, somewhere in this vast, unforgiving wilderness. He had searched for hours, with a growing dread coiling tighter in his chest with every passing minute. Wolves did not survive long alone in weather like this, especially not cubs barely weeks old. He had begun to fear the worst, had begun to prepare himself for the moment he would have to return to his pack and admit that he had failed to protect the last of his brother's line. And then, cutting faintly through the storm, he had caught a scent that did not belong in this forest. Human, female, mixed unmistakably with the scent of his missing nephew. He had followed it without hesitation, moving faster than the storm itself seemed to allow, driven by a mixture of confusion and urgent hope he did not fully understand. Humans did not venture into this territory. Humans certainly did not carry wolf cubs through blizzards while risking their own lives to do so. Yet here, in the clearing before him, exactly that had happened. Cale approached slowly, his massive form casting a long shadow across the snow despite the darkness. He could see the woman clearly now, curled protectively around the small bundle in her arms, her body utterly still except for the faint, shallow rise and fall of her chest. Her lips had turned a pale shade of blue. Frost had begun to gather in strands of her hair. He had seen humans before, from a distance, always with suspicion, always with the understanding that his kind and theirs did not mix, could not mix, without danger following close behind. But he had never seen a human do what this woman had done. She had carried an injured, unfamiliar creature for miles through a storm capable of killing grown wolves, and in the final moments before her own body failed her, she had shielded it with everything she had left. He shifted forms without conscious thought, the massive wolf giving way to the tall, broad-shouldered man who stood now in the swirling snow, his bare feet somehow unaffected by the cold in the way only his kind could manage. He knelt beside her, his expression unreadable, and gently pulled back the edge of the jacket covering the bundle in her arms. His nephew's small face looked up at him, weak but breathing, alive against every likelihood the night had offered. Something shifted in Cale's chest at that moment, something he could not immediately name. Gratitude, certainly. Disbelief, undeniably. But beneath those, something else entirely. A recognition that the world he understood, the rigid lines between his kind and the humans who lived beyond the borders of his territory, had just been complicated, in a way he was not prepared for. He looked down at the unconscious woman, her face pale and still against the white snow, and made a decision that would ripple through every corner of his carefully guarded world. He was not going to leave her here to die. Gathering her carefully into his arms, mindful of the fragile bundle still nestled against her chest, Cale rose to his full height and turned back toward the deep forest, toward the hidden stronghold that no human had ever entered and lived to speak of. The storm raged around him, indifferent to the significance of what had just occurred in that quiet clearing, but Cale understood, even in that first moment, that nothing about his pack's future would remain the same. Behind him, the wind finally began to settle, as though the forest itself had been holding its breath, waiting to see what he would choose. He did not look back at the clearing again. His path was set now, carved by an unlikely act of courage, from a stranger, who had risked everything, for a creature she barely understood. Whatever came next, the questions from his pack, the suspicion of his advisors, the danger of bringing an outsider into their world, none of it mattered more, in this moment, than the small, steady heartbeat of the cub cradled against the unconscious woman's chest. Elena Marsh had no way of knowing, as darkness closed fully around her, that she had just crossed into a world she never knew existed. She had no way of knowing that the storm she had barely survived was only the beginning of something far larger, far more dangerous, and far more extraordinary than anything she could have imagined when she first stepped off the washed-out road hours earlier. All she knew, in the last flickering moment, before consciousness slipped away entirely, was that the small creature in her arms was still breathing, and for now, in the depths of the storm, that had been enough. Warmth returned to Elena's body slowly, in uneven waves, long before her mind caught up with where she was. She became aware first of a low crackling sound, then of a soft blanket pressed against her skin, then of a strange, earthy scent that did not belong to any hospital room or ranger cabin she could imagine. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the world came into focus in pieces. She was lying on a wide bed made of thick furs and woven blankets, inside a room carved partly from stone and partly from timber, lit by the warm glow of a fire burning in a hearth she had never seen the likes of. The ceiling arched high above her, supported by dark wooden beams etched with symbols she did not recognize. For a long moment, she simply lay still, trying to convince herself she was dreaming. Then the memories returned in a rush. The storm, the cub, the pain in her ankle, the moment her legs had given out beneath her in the clearing. Elena sat up too quickly, and a wave of dizziness forced her back down onto the pillows with a soft groan. Her ankle, she noticed, had been carefully wrapped in a clean bandage. Someone had tended to her injuries while she was unconscious. Someone had brought her here, wherever here was. "You should rest a while longer," a voice said from across the room, calm and low, carrying an authority that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. She turned her head and saw him for the first time, a tall man standing near the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression difficult to read. He had sharp features, dark hair, and eyes that seemed to hold a strange golden light whenever the firelight caught them at certain angles. There was something about his presence that felt overwhelming, as though the room itself had grown smaller simply because he was standing in it. "Where am I?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse. "Who are you? What happened to the—" Before she could finish the question, a small shape shifted beneath the blankets near her side, and the wolf cub she had carried through the storm poked its head out, blinking sleepily. Relief flooded through her so suddenly that tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. "He's alive," she whispered, reaching out to gently stroke the cub's fur. "You're alive." "He is alive, because of you," the man said, stepping closer, though he kept a careful distance, as though unsure how she would react to his presence. You carried him through a storm that has killed grown men. You should not be alive either, and yet here you are." Elena studied him carefully, her mind still foggy from exhaustion, but sharpening by the second. "You found us," she said slowly. "You brought us here." "I did." "And where exactly is here?" He hesitated, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before he answered. "Somewhere you were never meant to see. Somewhere very few humans have ever entered and left again." The weight of his words settled over her slowly. She glanced around the room again, taking in details she had missed the first time, the strange carvings, the absence of any modern furniture or technology, the faint sound of movement and low voices somewhere beyond the walls, none of them speaking a language she recognized. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "Is this some kind of research facility? A private reserve?" "No," he said simply. "This is my home, and the creatures who live here are not entirely what you would call ordinary wolves." Elena's gaze dropped instinctively to the cub curled against her side, and then lifted back to the man standing before her, and a slow, disbelieving understanding began to form in her mind, one she was not yet ready to accept. "You're saying," she said slowly, "that you're like him. That you can become." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The man's expression shifted, something almost like respect flickering across his features at her quick understanding, rather than outright denial or panic. "My name is Kale," he said. "I lead the pack that calls this land home, and the cub you saved is the last surviving heir of my brother's bloodline." Elena's mind raced, trying to process everything she was hearing. Wolves that could take human form. A hidden world existing alongside the one she had always known. A cub she had carried through a blizzard, who turned out to hold some significant importance she could not fully grasp. "His parents," she said quietly, almost afraid to ask. "What happened to them?" Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the calm authority in his expression gave way to something darker, more pained. "They were killed," he said, "along with the rest of the litter. Only he survived, and only because someone found him before the cold finished what the attack began." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Who would do something like that? "That," Kale said, his voice hardening, "is a question I intend to answer very soon." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire, and the cub's quiet, contented breathing as it settled more comfortably against Elena's side. She studied Kale's face, trying to reconcile the intensity radiating from him with the gentleness he had clearly shown in caring for her injuries while she was unconscious. "Why bring me here?" she finally asked. "You could have left me where you found me, called for help. Anything other than bringing a stranger into whatever this place is." Kale was quiet for a long moment, as though considering how much truth to share. "Because you saved him," he said finally. "Because in doing so, you risked everything you had, without knowing what he was, or what it might cost you. That is not something my kind takes lightly. Whatever debt exists between us, I intend to honor it." Elena did not know how to respond to that. She had acted purely on instinct in that storm, driven by nothing more complicated than an unwillingness to let a helpless creature die alone in the snow. She had not been thinking about debts or bloodlines or hidden worlds. She had simply been thinking about survival, the cubs, and eventually, without quite meaning to, her own. "I have questions," she said eventually. "A lot of them." "I imagine you do," Kale replied, and for the first time, something almost like the ghost of a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You will have time to ask them, but first, you need rest. Whatever strength you have left, you spent saving him. It will take time to recover." As if to punctuate his point, Elena felt a fresh wave of exhaustion wash over her, heavier than before, pressing against her eyelids until she could barely keep them open. She wanted to argue, to demand answers immediately, but her body had other plans, betraying her with a heaviness she could no longer fight. "Sleep," Kale said quietly, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "You are safe here. I give you my word." Elena wanted to ask what the word of a wolf pack leader was worth to a human stranger who had wandered uninvited into his hidden world, but sleep claimed her before she could voice the question, pulling her back down into darkness with the small, warm weight of the cub still curled trustingly against her side. Cale watched her for a long moment after her breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep, an unfamiliar weight settling in his chest as he studied her face in the firelight. He had brought countless creatures into this den over the years, wounded pack members, orphaned pups, the occasional ally seeking shelter, but never once had he brought a human across the threshold of his territory. He was not entirely certain, standing there in the quiet aftermath of the storm, what that decision would ultimately cost him. But as he glanced down at his sleeping nephew, safe and warm for the first time, in what had likely felt like an eternity to the small creature, Cale found that he could not bring himself to regret it. Whatever came next, whatever consequences rippled outward from the choice he had made in that clearing, he would face them. He owed the woman sleeping before him nothing less than that. He turned and left the room quietly, already anticipating the difficult conversations that awaited him beyond its walls, where his pack would demand answers he was not yet certain he could give. The corridor outside Elena's room stretched long and narrow, carved from the same dark stone that formed much of the stronghold, lit by torches that burned with a steady, smokeless flame, unlike anything found in the human world. Cale walked its length with measured steps, his mind still turning over the events of the night, when a familiar voice called out from the shadows ahead. "You brought a human into our den." Cale did not need to turn to know who had spoken. Bram, his second-in-command and oldest friend, stepped out from a side passage, his arms crossed and his expression tight with barely restrained frustration. "I did," Cale said simply, continuing to walk. "Do you understand what you have done?" Bram fell into step beside him, lowering his voice even though the corridor appeared empty. "Our territory has remained hidden for generations, hundreds of years of careful secrecy, and you undid it in a single night." "She saved him, Bram." Cale's voice carried an edge that stopped his friend mid-stride. "She carried him through a storm that nearly killed her, without knowing what he was, without any reason to risk her own life, for a creature she had never seen before. If she had not found him, he would be dead." Bram's jaw tightened, the tension in his shoulders easing only slightly. "I understand the debt you feel, I do, but bringing her here, into the heart of our territory, where every member of this pack now knows a human sleeps within our walls. She is injured and exhausted," Cale interrupted. "She poses no threat." "That is not the concern," Bram said sharply. "The concern is what happens when she wakes fully and understands everything she has seen. Humans talk, Cale. They share stories. One word in the wrong place, and everything our ancestors built to keep us safe collapses." Cale stopped walking and turned to face his friend directly, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "I have already considered that risk," he said, "and I intend to manage it carefully. But I will not repay a debt of this magnitude by casting her back out into a storm, injured and alone, simply because her presence here makes some among us uncomfortable." Bram studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, as he seemed to recognize the futility of continuing the argument. "The council will want to speak with you," he said finally. "Word has already spread. They are gathering now." Cale nodded once, unsurprised. "Then let us not keep them waiting." The council chamber sat at the heart of the stronghold, a wide circular room, ringed with stone seats, occupied by the pack's eldest and most respected members. Cale entered to find nearly all of them already present, their expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to open disapproval. He took his place at the center of the circle without hesitation, meeting each gaze in turn. "You have all heard what happened tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's natural acoustics. "My brother's last surviving pup has been found alive, thanks to the courage of a human woman who risked her own life to save him." Murmurs rippled through the gathered council members, some skeptical, some clearly moved by the account despite themselves. An elder woman near the front of the circle, her silver hair braided elaborately and her eyes sharp despite her age, rose slowly to her feet. "A human," she repeated, her tone carefully neutral. "You would have us believe a human risked everything to save a wolf cub she had never seen before, expecting nothing in return?" "I would have you believe exactly that," Cale said, "because it is precisely what happened. I found her myself, collapsed in the snow, her own body shielding him from the cold even as her strength failed completely. She did not know what he was. She acted out of instinct and compassion alone." Another council member, A broad-shouldered man with a scar running along his jaw spoke up from across the chamber. Instinct and compassion do not erase the danger her presence creates. If word spreads beyond her that our kind exists, it will not spread, Cale said firmly, because I do not intend to send her away until I am certain of her discretion, and because I intend to personally ensure she understands the gravity of what she has stumbled into. And if she cannot be trusted? The elder woman asked quietly. What then? Cale held her gaze steadily. Then I will deal with that circumstance when and if it arises. But I will not condemn her before giving her the chance to prove herself, not after what she has already sacrificed for one of our own. The chamber fell into a tense silence, broken eventually by the elder woman's slow, measured sigh. You have always led with your instincts, Cale, even when they conflict with caution. It has served you well, more often than not. But this decision carries risks that extend beyond yourself. It touches every member of this pack, every family within these walls. I am aware of that, Cale said, which is why I ask for your patience, not your blind trust. Give me time to understand her, to determine whether she can be relied upon to keep our secret. If I am wrong about her, I will accept full responsibility for whatever consequences follow. The council deliberated quietly among themselves for several long minutes, murmured exchanges passing back and forth across the circle, while Cale waited, outwardly composed, despite the tension coiled tightly in his chest. Finally, the elder woman turned back to face him, her expression still guarded but no longer openly hostile. You may keep her here, under careful watch, until her injuries heal, and you have determined her intentions, she said. But know this, Cale. If her presence brings danger to this pack, the responsibility will rest entirely on your shoulders. I accept that, Cale said without hesitation. The council began to disperse, small clusters of members lingering to exchange quiet, uncertain conversations as they filed out of the chamber. Bram remained behind, watching Cale with an expression that mixed concern with something almost like reluctant admiration. You realize you have just staked your position within this pack on the judgment of a woman you met only hours ago, Bram said quietly once the chamber had emptied. I am aware, Cale replied. And you are certain of this decision? Cale considered the question for a long moment, his thoughts drifting back to the image of Elena, curled protectively around his nephew, in that snow-covered clearing, her body failing, while her arms remained locked tightly around the fragile creature she barely knew. There had been nothing calculated in her actions, nothing that suggested hidden motives or self-interest, only pure, unguarded instinct to protect something small and helpless. I am certain, he said finally, that whatever she is not someone who deserved to be left to die in that storm. The rest, we will discover together. Bram studied him a moment longer, before nodding slowly, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Then I suppose we discover it together, he said, though I hope, for all our sakes, that your instincts prove correct this time. Cale did not respond immediately, his gaze drifting toward the corridor leading back to the room where Elena slept, his nephew curled safely at her side. Whatever uncertainty lingered within him about the path he had chosen, one truth remained unshaken. He would not undo the decision he had made in that clearing, regardless of the difficulties it might bring. The pack's future, and perhaps something else entirely that he was not yet ready to name, now rested on the choices that lay ahead. As dawn began to break faintly over the mountains, casting the first pale light through narrow windows carved high into the stronghold's stone walls, Cale made his way back toward Elena's room, uncertain what conversations awaited him once she fully woke, but resolved to face them regardless of the cost. Behind him, the council chamber slowly emptied, its members carrying with them the weight of a decision that would soon test the foundations of everything their pack had carefully protected for generations. Elena woke to sunlight filtering through a narrow stone window, warmer and gentler than the firelight of the night before, and for a moment she simply lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sounds drifting through the walls around her, distant voices, the soft padding of footsteps. Somewhere far below, what sounded almost like laughter. The cub, she noticed immediately, was gone from her side. Panic flickered briefly through her chest before she spotted him near the hearth, curled contentedly on a folded blanket, his small body rising and falling with steady, healthy breaths. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by a fresh wave of questions she had not yet found answers to. She sat up carefully this time, testing her ankle before putting weight on it, and found the pain had eased considerably overnight, though it still throbbed with a dull ache when she moved too quickly. Someone had left a change of clothes folded neatly at the foot of the bed, simple but well made, along with a small basin of water and a plate of food she did not recognize, but which smelled surprisingly appetizing. She was still studying the unfamiliar meal when a soft knock sounded at the door, and Cale stepped inside without waiting for a response, his expression more relaxed than she remembered from the night before, though still carrying that same quiet intensity. "You look better," he said, his gaze flicking briefly to the cub before returning to her. "I feel better," Elena admitted, "though I still have about 100 questions." "I imagined you would." He crossed the room and settled into a wooden chair near the hearth, gesturing for her to remain seated. "Ask what you wish. I will answer as honestly as I am able." Elena studied him for a moment, choosing her first question carefully. "Why me? Why bring me all the way here instead of, I don't know, leaving me somewhere I would have been found by rescuers?" "Because I could not be certain you would keep what you had already seen to yourself," Cale said honestly. "And because I owed you a debt I did not wish to leave unpaid. Bringing you here allowed me to address both concerns at once." "So, I'm a prisoner," Elena said slowly, though there was more curiosity than fear in her voice. "You are a guest," Cale corrected, "though I understand, if the distinction feels unclear given the circumstances. You are free to move within the stronghold. You are not free, for now, to leave the territory, not until I am certain your discretion can be trusted." Elena considered that for a moment, surprised to find that the idea of remaining here did not fill her with the dread she might have expected. There was something undeniably strange about the entire situation, but strange, she was discovering, did not necessarily mean frightening. "And if I promise never to tell anyone what I've seen," she asked, "would that be enough?" "Words are easy," Cale said. "Trust is earned through time, not promises alone. I do not doubt your sincerity, but I have a responsibility to my pack that extends beyond simple assurances." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the logic even if part of her chafed slightly against the restriction. "How long do you expect that to take? Earning your trust, I mean." "I do not know," Cale admitted. "It has never been tested quite like this before." A comfortable silence settled between them, interrupted only by the cub stirring near the fire, stretching and yawning, before padding unsteadily across the floor toward Elena. She smiled despite herself, reaching down to scoop him gently into her lap, and something in Cale's expression softened as he watched the interaction. "He seems to trust you already," he observed. "He probably just remembers I kept him warm," Elena said, running her fingers gently through the cub's fur. "Does he have a name?" Cale's expression flickered briefly with something like sorrow, before settling back into composure. His parents had not yet chosen one before they were killed. "It is tradition among my kind to name a pup only once they survive their first difficult winter, as a way of honoring the strength it takes simply to endure." "That's a beautiful tradition," Elena said quietly, "and a sad one." "Many of our traditions are both," Cale replied. Elena studied him for a moment, noticing the way his expression had grown distant, clearly weighed down by memories he had not yet shared with her. "Tell me about them," she said gently. "His parents, I mean, if you want to." Cale was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, as though searching for the right words. "My brother Darian led a smaller pack, allied with ours, along the northern edge of our territory. He and his mate Sella had waited a long time for a healthy litter. When word reached us that their den had been attacked, I traveled there myself, hoping I could still help." "What happened?" Elena asked softly. "I arrived too late," Cale said, his voice hardening slightly. "Darian and Sella were already gone, most of the litter as well. Only this one," he glanced toward the cub now dozing contentedly in Elena's lap, "had somehow survived, though we could not immediately find him among the wreckage of the attack. I searched for hours before catching your scent mixed with his in that storm." Elena felt a chill settle over her despite the warmth of the room. "Who attacked them?" Cale's jaw tightened visibly. "A rival pack most likely, though we have not yet confirmed which one, or why. Territorial disputes between packs are not unheard of, but an attack of this brutality, targeting a den specifically, rather than defending contested land, suggests something more calculated than simple rivalry." "You think someone wanted him dead specifically?" Elena said slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. Not just the pack in general. It is a possibility I cannot yet dismiss, Cale admitted. Darian's bloodline carries certain significance within the broader hierarchy of packs in this region. Removing his heir entirely would weaken alliances that have protected this territory for generations. Elena looked down at the small, vulnerable creature, sleeping peacefully in her lap, utterly unaware of the political and violent world he had been born into, and felt a fierce, unexpected protectiveness rise within her chest. Then it's a good thing he survived, she said firmly. Something shifted in Cale's expression as he watched her, an emotion he did not immediately name even to himself. Yes, he agreed quietly. It is. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the fire crackling softly between them, until Elena finally spoke again, her curiosity refusing to stay contained any longer. So what happens now? For me, I mean. Do I just stay here indefinitely? Cale considered the question carefully before answering. For now, yes, until your injuries have fully healed, and I am satisfied that your presence here poses no risk to my pack. Beyond that, I have not yet decided. Much depends on what I learn about you in the coming days. That sounds ominous, Elena said, though a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It is not meant to be, Cale replied, and for the first time since she had woken in this strange hidden world, she saw something almost like warmth flicker across his otherwise guarded expression. Consider it instead an invitation to prove that my instincts about you were correct. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, aware suddenly of how strange and improbable this entire situation was, and yet unable to summon the fear she might have expected to feel. Whatever waited for her beyond the walls of this hidden stronghold, whatever dangers or complications lay ahead, she found herself, against all reasonable judgment, willing to see where this unlikely path might lead. All right, she said finally. Then I suppose I have some proving to do. Cale's expression shifted into something that might almost have been called a smile, brief and unpracticed but genuine nonetheless. I suppose you do, he said, rising from his chair. Rest a while longer. I will return this evening, and we will begin properly introducing you to the world you have found yourself in. He left the room quietly, and Elena sat for a long while afterward, absently stroking the sleeping cub in her lap, turning over everything she had learned in her mind. Somewhere beyond these walls, a dangerous mystery waited to be uncovered, one that had already claimed innocent lives and threatened the fragile creature now curled trustingly against her. She did not yet know how deeply she would become entangled in that mystery before it was resolved. But as she looked down at the small, sleeping cub, she felt a quiet certainty settle over her, one that had nothing to do with logic or caution. Whatever came next, she was not going to walk away from this. Days passed quickly within the stronghold, each one bringing Elena further into a world she was only beginning to understand. She learned the rhythms of the pack, the way meals were shared communally in a wide hall carved from stone, the way younger members trained in open courtyards under careful supervision, the way laughter and easy conversation filled corridors that had seemed cold and imposing on her first night. Slowly, cautiously, some of the pack's initial suspicion toward her began to soften, replaced by a wary curiosity that occasionally bordered on genuine warmth. Not everyone shared that shift, however. She noticed it most clearly during meals, when certain members would fall silent as she passed, their eyes following her with expressions she could not quite decipher. She noticed it in the way conversations sometimes stopped abruptly when she entered a room, only to resume in hushed tones once she had settled somewhere out of easy earshot. It was during one such afternoon, while she sat in a quiet corner of the courtyard, watching the cub chase a fallen leaf across the stones, that she first overheard something that made her blood run cold. Two pack members stood near a nearby archway, their voices low but not quite low enough to escape her notice entirely. Cannot understand why he trusts her so easily, one of them muttered. An outsider, and a human at that. It is reckless. Reckless is generous, the other replied. If the attack on Darian's den was meant to weaken us, what better way to finish the task than to plant someone within our own walls? She arrives conveniently, saves the cub conveniently, and now sits at the heart of our stronghold learning everything about us. Elena's stomach tightened uncomfortably. She had not considered, until that moment, that her presence here might be viewed not merely with suspicion, but as a genuine potential threat, evidence of some larger conspiracy she had no part in. Kale would never allow harm to come to this pack, the first voice said, though there was uncertainty threading through the words. Kale is not thinking clearly where she is concerned, the second replied. Anyone with eyes can see it. The conversation drifted further away, before Elena could hear more, leaving her sitting frozen in the courtyard, the cub now curled unaware against her leg, oblivious to the tension gathering around them both. She had known, intellectually, that her presence here created complications. She had not fully considered, until now, that some among the pack might view her as something far more sinister than an unwelcome guest. That evening, when Kale arrived to check on her, as he had each day since her arrival, she found herself unable to shake the unease those words had planted. "You seem troubled," he observed, settling into the familiar chair near the hearth. Elena hesitated, weighing whether to share what she had overheard, before deciding honesty was the wiser path. "I heard some of your pack talking today," she admitted. "They think I might be involved somehow in the attack on your brother's den, that my arrival here was too convenient to be accidental." Kale's expression darkened, though his voice remained steady. "Who said this?" "It doesn't matter who," Elena said. "What matters is whether you believe it too." "I do not," Kale said immediately, without hesitation. "I found you myself, Elena. I saw the exhaustion in your body, the injuries you sustained carrying him through that storm. No conspiracy could fabricate what I witnessed that night." "But others aren't so certain," Elena said quietly, "and I understand why. I'm a stranger. I don't belong here, not really. It makes sense that some of your people would question my motives." Kale studied her for a long moment, something complicated passing behind his eyes. "Suspicion is a natural response to unfamiliar circumstances," he said finally. "It does not make their concerns correct, only understandable. I will address it directly with the council, if that would ease your mind." "I don't want you fighting battles on my behalf," Elena said. "Not if it creates more division within your pack." "The division already exists," Kale replied. "Whether I address it or not will not change that reality, but allowing false suspicions to fester unchallenged serves no one, least of all you." Elena considered his words carefully, aware of the genuine concern beneath them, and felt something warm settle in her chest, despite the unease of the day. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing me." "I have little difficulty believing what I witnessed with my own eyes," Kale said simply. "The greater challenge lies in convincing others who were not present that night." They sat together for a while longer, the conversation gradually shifting toward lighter topics as the cub wandered between them, seeking attention from both in turn. Elena found herself, not for the first time, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them despite the vast differences separating their worlds. Kale, for all his guarded authority among his pack, revealed a thoughtful, patient side during these quiet evenings that she had not expected from her first impression of him. It was during a lull in their conversation, as the fire crackled softly and the cub finally settled into sleep between them, that Elena found herself asking a question that had been building for days. "Do you know yet who attacked your brother's den?" Kale's expression grew serious once more. "We have gathered some information," he said carefully. "Scouts have reported unfamiliar movement along our eastern border, closer to territory belonging to a rival pack we have had tensions with in the past. Nothing confirmed yet, but the timing is difficult to dismiss as coincidence." "What happens if it's confirmed?" Elena asked. "Then we will have decisions to make," Kale said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested those decisions would not be simple ones. Decisions that could affect far more than just this pack. Elena felt a chill settle over her, an instinctive understanding that whatever conflict simmered beneath the surface of this hidden world was far from resolved, and that she, despite her outsider status, had already become entangled in its unfolding consequences. "I want to help," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Kale looked at her, with an expression that mixed surprise with something gentler. "This is not your fight, Elena. You owe us nothing beyond what you have already given." "He's alive because of me," Elena said, glancing down at the sleeping cub. "That means something to me too, whether or not I fully understand this world yet. If there's danger coming, I don't want to sit here helplessly, while you and your pack face it alone." Kale studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression that Elena could not fully name, though it left a warmth spreading through her chest regardless. "You are an unusual woman," he said finally. Is that a compliment? Elena asked, a small smile tugging at her lips despite the seriousness of their conversation. It is, Cale said, and this time his answering smile reached his eyes fully, brief but unmistakable. One I do not offer easily. The moment stretched between them, comfortable and charged in equal measure, until the cub stirred slightly in his sleep, breaking the spell and drawing both their attention back to the small, vulnerable life that had brought them together in the first place. Whatever grew between them in these quiet evenings, whatever danger gathered on the horizon beyond the stronghold's walls, Elena found herself increasingly certain that she had, against every reasonable expectation, found a place she was not ready to leave behind. Weeks passed, and Elena's ankle healed fully, though she found herself in no hurry to test the boundaries of her freedom within the territory. Something about the rhythm of life within the stronghold had settled into her bones in a way she had not anticipated, and the prospect of returning to her old life, quiet and solitary as it had been, no longer held the same appeal it once did. She spent her mornings helping tend to injured pack members who occasionally sought her out once word spread of her veterinary training, her steady hands and calm demeanor earning quiet respect, even among those who had initially regarded her with suspicion. She spent her afternoons with the cub, now growing stronger and more playful by the day, chasing him through the courtyard as he tumbled over his own paws in clumsy enthusiasm. And she spent her evenings with Cale, conversations that grew longer and more comfortable with each passing day, stretching from careful discussions about pack politics into easier territory. Favorite memories, small joys, quiet fears neither had shared with anyone else in years. It was during one such evening, as autumn winds began to sweep through the mountains surrounding the stronghold, that Elena found herself walking beside Cale along a high ridge overlooking the territory, the last light of sunset painting the sky in deep shades of orange and violet. You seem different tonight, Cale observed, glancing at her sideways as they walked. Different how? Elena asked. Quieter, thoughtful. Elena considered how to answer honestly. I've been thinking about home, she admitted. Not that I want to leave, she added quickly, seeing something flicker across his expression, just wondering what my life would look like now, compared to before all of this happened. And what does it look like? Cale asked. Elena paused, considering the question seriously. Before, I think I was just going through the motions. Work, home, sleep, repeat. I cared about my job, about the animals I helped. But there was always this quiet loneliness underneath it all that I didn't really acknowledge until I came here. And now? Now I feel like I actually belong somewhere, Elena said quietly. Which is strange, considering how impossible that should be, given everything I am, compared to everyone here. Cale stopped walking, turning to face her fully, his expression unusually open. You underestimate how much you have already changed things here, Elena. Not just for my nephew, though what you did for him alone would be enough. You have changed how many within this pack view the world beyond our borders. You have changed how I view it. How so? Elena asked softly. I have spent my life believing the divide between our worlds was absolute, Cale said. That trust between humans and my kind was not merely difficult, but impossible. You have proven that belief incomplete, if nothing else. Elena felt her heart quicken at the sincerity in his voice, at the way his gaze held hers steadily, despite the vulnerability clearly costing him something to express. I never expected to find something like this, she admitted. A place, a purpose, She hesitated, unsure how far she wanted to venture into unspoken territory. A connection you did not anticipate, Cale finished for her, his voice low. Yes, Elena said quietly. That. The silence between them stretched, charged with something neither had fully acknowledged until this moment, until Cale finally spoke again, his voice carrying a rare uncertainty. I have watched leaders throughout my life form bonds meant purely to strengthen alliances or secure advantage. I promised myself long ago I would never settle for something so hollow. I did not expect, when I carried you back from that storm, that I would find myself questioning everything I once believed impossible. Elena's breath caught slightly at the weight of his words. What are you saying, Cale? I am saying, he replied carefully, that whatever grows between us, it is not something I take lightly, nor something I fully understand yet myself. But I find myself, against every instinct toward caution, unwilling to pretend it does not exist. Elena stepped closer, closing the small distance between them, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and certainty she had rarely experienced so strongly before. "I feel it too," she admitted quietly. "I just didn't know if it was something I was allowed to feel, given everything else happening around us." Cale reached out slowly, his hand brushing gently against hers, a small gesture that carried far more weight than its simplicity suggested. "Whatever challenges lie ahead," he said quietly, "I would rather face them with this understanding between us than continue pretending it does not exist." The moment held between them, fragile and new, until the distant howl of a pack sentinel echoed across the ridge, a sound both had learned to recognize as routine communication among the wider territory. Cale's expression shifted immediately, alertness replacing the softness of moments before. "That's not routine," he said quietly, listening more carefully to the pattern of the distant call. "What does it mean?" Elena asked, feeling the shift in tension immediately. "Movement," Cale said grimly, already turning back toward the stronghold. "Along the eastern border, the same territory we suspected before." Elena's stomach tightened with sudden apprehension. "The pack responsible for the attack?" "Possibly," Cale said, his pace quickening as they made their way back down the ridge. "I need to gather my scouts and confirm the report myself." "I'm coming with you," Elena said immediately. Cale turned to argue, but something in her expression stopped him before the words fully formed. "This is dangerous, Elena. I cannot guarantee your safety if this becomes a confrontation." "I'm not asking you to guarantee anything," Elena said firmly. "I'm telling you I'm not staying behind while you and your pack walk into danger. Not after everything this place has come to mean to me." Cale studied her for a long moment, something like reluctant admiration mixing with genuine concern in his expression. "Stay close to me then," he said finally, "and do exactly as I say, if the situation grows dangerous." Elena nodded firmly, matching his pace as they hurried back toward the stronghold, the fragile unspoken bond that had just begun to form between them, now overshadowed by the more immediate threat gathering at the edges of the territory they had both come to call home. Whatever tenderness had passed between them moments before remained, quiet and steady beneath the surface, a promise neither intended to abandon, regardless of what challenges lay ahead. As they descended the ridge together, the last light of sunset finally faded fully into darkness, and somewhere beyond the borders of the territory, the first signs of the danger both had feared for weeks began to stir in earnest. The stronghold had transformed by the time Elena and Cale returned, the quiet evening routines replaced entirely by focused, purposeful movement. Warriors gathered in the main courtyard, checking weapons and exchanging low, urgent conversations. Scouts arrived in quick succession, delivering reports that grew increasingly troubling with each new account. Bram met them at the entrance, his expression grim. "Confirmed movement along the eastern ridge," he reported immediately. "At least a dozen warriors, possibly more, moving in formation rather than simple patrol patterns. This is not incidental." "Markings?" Cale asked sharply. "Consistent with the Thornwood pack," Bram confirmed. "The same territory we suspected after the attack on Darian's den." Elena watched the exchange with growing unease, the reality of the danger settling over her more heavily now that it carried a name and a confirmed presence, rather than simply distant suspicion. She glanced toward the cub, now being carefully watched by one of the pack's younger members near the courtyard's edge, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her. "What do they want?" she asked quietly. "Territory, most likely," Cale said, his expression hardening into the focused intensity Elena had glimpsed only briefly before. "Or a message, meant to remind us that Darian's death weakened our alliances more than we would like to admit. Or they're finishing what they started," Bram added grimly. "If the cub's survival became known to them, eliminating him fully would remove any lingering claim to Darian's territory and alliances." Elena's blood ran cold at the implication. "You think they know he's alive?" "I do not know," Cale admitted. "But I would rather prepare for that possibility than be caught unprepared if it proves true." The following hours passed in a blur of preparation, Elena finding herself drawn into the effort despite her outsider status, her medical training proving unexpectedly valuable as warriors gathered supplies and reviewed strategy. She moved between groups, helping organize emergency provisions, checking that those preparing for potential conflict carried what they might need should injuries occur, her hands staying steady, even as her mind raced with worry for the pack she had come to care for so deeply. Cale found her during a brief lull, standing near the edge of the courtyard as she methodically organized bandages and salves gathered from the stronghold's stores. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You did not have to involve yourself in this," he said quietly, though there was clear appreciation beneath the observation. "I told you already," Elena said, without looking up from her task. "This is my fight too now, whether or not I fully belong here by blood or bond." Cale's expression softened, though the tension of the coming conflict remained evident in the set of his shoulders. "If the confrontation comes, I need you to remain within the stronghold's inner chambers, away from the courtyard entirely. Whatever happens, your safety matters to me more than you may realize." Elena finally looked up, meeting his gaze steadily. "And what about your safety?" "I have led this pack through conflict before," Cale said. "I do not intend to lose to Thornwood now. Not when so much depends on protecting what we have already fought to save." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that his safety mattered just as much as anyone else's within these walls, but she recognized the futility of the argument, given the responsibility resting on his shoulders. Instead, she reached out, taking his hand in both of hers, a small gesture that carried the weight of everything neither had fully voiced since their conversation on the ridge. "Come back to me," she said quietly. "Whatever happens out there, come back." Cale's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded passing across his features, before he pulled her gently into an embrace, brief but fierce, as though committing the moment to memory, before whatever trials awaited beyond the stronghold's walls. "I intend to," he said against her hair. "I have far too much reason to return now." The moment ended too quickly, interrupted by Bram's approach carrying fresh reports from the scouts stationed along the border. Cale released her reluctantly, his expression shifting back into the focused authority his position demanded, though his hand lingered against hers a moment longer than necessary before he turned to address the new information. "They have stopped their advance," Bram reported, "camped just beyond the eastern ridge, close enough to be seen, but not yet crossing into contested territory." "A show of force then," Cale said, considering the implications carefully. "Or they are waiting for something." "Reinforcements, perhaps," Bram suggested. "Or simply testing our response before committing further." Cale's jaw tightened as he weighed the possibilities. "Gather the senior warriors. We will meet them at the ridge ourselves, make clear that we are aware of their presence, and prepared to defend our territory should they choose to cross it." "And if they choose to fight regardless?" Bram asked. "Then we will be ready," Cale said grimly. Elena watched the exchange with mounting anxiety, understanding fully now the gravity of what approached. She thought of the cub, still too young to understand the danger gathering around the only home he had ever known, and felt a fierce resolve settle over her own uncertainty. "Let me help prepare the injured chambers," she said, turning to address one of the pack's healers standing nearby. "If this becomes a confrontation, we need to be ready for whatever comes back through those gates." The healer, an older woman who had grown gradually warmer toward Elena over the preceding weeks, nodded gratefully, clearly relieved to have additional steady hands during what promised to be a difficult night ahead. As preparations continued around her, Elena found herself glancing repeatedly toward the courtyard entrance, watching Cale move among his warriors with quiet, commanding authority, and felt a fierce, unwavering certainty settle over the fear coiling in her chest. Whatever came through those gates in the hours ahead, whatever danger the Thornwood pack intended to bring against the home she had come to love so unexpectedly, she was not going to stand by helplessly while it unfolded. She had already proven, in a storm months ago, that she was willing to risk everything for something worth protecting. As the stronghold prepared itself for the confrontation gathering just beyond its borders, Elena understood with quiet clarity that this fight, too, was one she intended to see through to its end. The eastern ridge stretched wide and exposed beneath a moonless sky, the kind of darkness that made every shifting shadow feel like a threat. Cale stood at the front of his gathered warriors, Bram at his side, their eyes fixed on the tree line where the Thornwood pack had made camp just beyond the boundary marking Ashbourne territory. For a long while, nothing moved. The two groups faced each other across the ridge in tense silence. neither willing to make the first gesture that might tip the fragile standoff into open conflict. Then, from among the thornwood ranks, a single figure stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression carrying the confident arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation alone. "Cale Ashbourne," the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the open ground. "It has been a long time." "Not long enough, Garrick," Cale replied evenly, though tension coiled visibly through his shoulders. Garrick's mouth curved into a thin smile. "I heard rumors that Darian's bloodline survived the unfortunate incident at his den. I confess, I did not expect to find you quite so eager to confirm those rumors by gathering your warriors here tonight." "You attacked my brother's family," Cale said, his voice hardening. "Do not pretend otherwise now that we stand face to face." Garrick spread his hands in a gesture of feigned innocence. "Accusations without proof carry little weight, Cale. Territorial disputes happen. Unfortunate losses occur. It does not follow that Thornwood bears responsibility for every misfortune that befalls your allies." "Then explain your warriors camped at my border," Cale countered. "So soon after that misfortune, so close to the very territory where my brother's family was slaughtered." Something flickered behind Garrick's confident expression, quickly masked, but not entirely hidden from Cale's careful scrutiny. "Merely ensuring the stability of contested land," Garrick said smoothly. "Nothing more." "Then you will not object to withdrawing your forces immediately," Cale said, "given that this land remains firmly within Ashbourne territory, contested by no legitimate claim." Tension crackled through the air as the two leaders stared each other down, the warriors gathered behind each of them tensing in anticipation of whatever came next. For a long, drawn-out moment, it seemed the confrontation might resolve without violence, Garrick's expression calculating as he weighed the risks of pressing further against a pack clearly prepared to defend its claim. Then, from somewhere behind the Thornwood ranks, a warrior shifted suddenly, drawing a weapon in a motion that shattered whatever fragile restraint had held the standoff in place. Chaos erupted almost instantly, warriors from both sides surging forward as the confrontation that had simmered for weeks finally boiled over into open conflict. Cale moved instinctively, shifting fluidly into his wolf form as he met the first wave of Thornwood warriors head-on, his movements sharp and precise, despite the fury driving his response. Around him, his own pack fought with fierce determination, defending territory and family with an intensity born of weeks of gathering dread, finally given release. Back within the stronghold, Elena worked alongside the pack's healers, preparing for the wounded she knew would soon arrive, her hands steady, despite the anxious knot tightening in her chest with every passing minute. She had insisted on remaining useful rather than hiding away entirely, and now, as the first reports of active conflict reached the stronghold, she found herself grateful for the distraction her work provided against the fear gnawing steadily at her composure. The first wounded arrived within the hour, carried by pack members who had rushed them back from the ridge, injuries ranging from minor to severe. Elena moved between them with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds and applying what remedies she had learned during her weeks within the stronghold, working alongside the healers, with a focus that helped steady her own mounting worry. It was during a brief lull between arrivals that Bram appeared at the chamber entrance, his expression grim, a fresh wound bleeding along his shoulder that he seemed to have entirely ignored in his urgency. Elena asked immediately, her stomach dropping at the sight of his injury. "He is still fighting," Bram said, wincing as Elena guided him toward a seat and began examining the wound with quick, careful hands. The confrontation grew fiercer than anticipated. Garrick brought more warriors than our scouts initially reported. "Is he winning?" Elena asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "He is holding his ground," Bram said, "but Thornwood's numbers have proven greater than expected. I came back only to gather additional warriors from those held in reserve." Elena's hands moved automatically, cleaning and binding the wound, as her mind raced through the implications of what Bram had just revealed. "Take me with you," she said suddenly. Bram stared at her incredulously. "This is not a place for—" "I'm not asking permission," Elena interrupted firmly. "If warriors are being wounded out there, someone needs to be ready to help immediately, not wait for them to be carried all the way back here first." "I can do that, let me." Bram studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing the wisdom of her request against the urgency of the moment, before nodding sharply. "Stay behind our lines," he said. "Do not, under any circumstances, place yourself directly within the conflict." Elena nodded firmly, gathering emergency supplies quickly, before following Bram back out into the night, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination as they made their way toward the sounds of ongoing conflict echoing across the ridge. Whatever waited for her there, whatever danger the confrontation still held, she was not willing to remain safely hidden while those she had come to care for so deeply continued fighting for the home and family she had unexpectedly found among them. The ridge, when they finally reached its edge, presented a scene of chaos and determination, in equal measure. Warriors from both packs, locked in fierce combat beneath the star-filled sky, the fate of Ashbourne territory, and everything Elena had come to love, hanging uncertainly in the balance of the conflict still unfolding before her. The conflict on the ridge had begun to shift by the time Elena and Bram arrived, the Ashbourne warriors slowly gaining ground against a Thornwood force that had clearly underestimated the resolve defending this territory. Elena stayed low near a cluster of boulders as instructed, her supplies ready, watching anxiously for any opportunity to help, without placing herself directly in harm's way. She spotted Cale near the center of the conflict, still in his wolf form, moving with a fierce, controlled intensity as he faced down Garrick directly, the two leaders locked in a confrontation that seemed to have drawn the attention of warriors from both sides. Elena's heart lodged in her throat as she watched them circle each other, the outcome of the broader conflict seeming to hinge increasingly on whatever resolution their personal battle might bring. Garrick fought with brutal efficiency, clearly skilled despite his earlier arrogance, but Cale matched him move for move, driven by a fury that had been building since the night he first found his nephew's parents slaughtered in their den. The two clashed repeatedly, neither gaining decisive advantage, until finally Cale found an opening, driving Garrick back with a final, decisive strike that left the Thornwood leader pinned and unable to continue. A tense silence fell across the ridge as the surrounding warriors, sensing the shift in their leader's confrontation, gradually eased back from their own individual conflicts, all attention turning toward the outcome, now being decided between Cale and Garrick. Cale shifted back into human form, standing over his defeated opponent with barely restrained fury. "Confess it," he demanded. "Admit that Thornwood was responsible for the attack on my brother's den." Garrick, breathing heavily, and clearly recognizing the futility of continued denial, finally allowed a bitter laugh to escape him. "Yes," he admitted. "It was us. Darian's alliance grew too strong for our liking. Removing his bloodline seemed the simplest solution to weakening Ashbourne's influence in this region." A ripple of anger passed through the gathered Ashbourne warriors at the confirmation, though none moved without Cale's direction, their leader's authority holding even in this moment of raw emotion. "And the cub?" Cale pressed. "Did you know he survived?" "We suspected," Garrick admitted. "Rumors reached us weeks ago that something had escaped the attack. I brought my warriors here tonight to confirm those rumors and finish what we started, if necessary." Cale's expression hardened further, though he maintained the restraint that had defined his leadership throughout the confrontation. "You will withdraw completely from this territory," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "And you will answer to the broader council of packs for what you have done here tonight. Attacking a den, killing innocents including young unable to defend themselves. These are not actions any pack will easily forgive, regardless of territorial disputes." Garrick, recognizing the totality of his defeat, offered no further resistance as Ashbourne warriors moved to secure him and the remaining Thornwood forces, who had not already retreated from the ridge. The conflict, which had threatened to consume the night in ongoing violence, resolved with a swiftness that left many among the gathered warriors visibly relieved. Elena emerged cautiously from behind the boulders once the fighting had fully ceased, moving quickly to help tend to the wounded scattered across the ridge, her earlier anxiety giving way to focused purpose as she worked alongside the pack's healers to address injuries sustained during the confrontation. She found Cale eventually, standing near the ridge's edge, watching as his warriors organized the aftermath of the battle, his expression a complex mixture of exhaustion and quiet relief. "You're hurt," she said immediately, noticing a shallow wound along his forearm that he had clearly been ignoring in the aftermath's urgency. "It is minor," Cale said, though he allowed her to examine it regardless, something in his expression softening at her immediate concern despite the chaos still surrounding them. "Minor or not, it needs attention," Elena said firmly, already reaching for supplies to clean and bind the wound. Cale watched her work in silence for a moment, before speaking again. "You should not have come out here," he said, though there was no real reproach in his voice, only quiet gratitude beneath the words. "Bram should not have allowed it." "I made him," Elena said simply. "I wasn't going to sit safely behind stone walls while you and everyone else here fought for something I've come to care about, just as much as any of you." Cale's expression shifted, something warm and unguarded passing across his features, despite the exhaustion clearly weighing on him. "You are a remarkable woman, Elena Marsh," he said quietly. "I do not think I have properly told you that." Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, despite the seriousness of the night's events, a small smile tugging at her lips as she finished binding his wound. "You've mentioned something similar before," she said, "though I don't think I ever tire of hearing it." Around them, the ridge slowly settled into the organized aftermath of conflict resolved. Warriors tending to their wounded, others securing the retreating Thornwood forces. The tension that had gripped the territory for weeks, finally beginning to ease into something resembling relief. Cale reached out, taking Elena's hand gently in his own, the gesture carrying the weight of everything that had passed between them since the night he first found her collapsed in that snow-covered clearing. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "I find myself increasingly certain that I do not wish to face it without you beside me." Elena's heart swelled at the sincerity in his words, the culmination of weeks spent slowly building trust and understanding between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly separate. "Then it's a good thing," she said softly, "that I have no intention of going anywhere." As dawn began to break faintly over the mountains, casting warm light across the ridge where conflict had raged only hours before, Elena and Cale stood together amid the aftermath, the fragile bond between them now tempered and strengthened by the trials they had faced together, ready to carry forward into whatever future awaited the pack, the territory, and the unexpected family that had formed between a human woman and the Wolf King who had once found her, unconscious and unlikely, cradling his nephew in the snow. Spring arrived gradually in the mountains surrounding Ashbourne territory, the harsh winter that had first brought Elena into this hidden world, giving way slowly to warmer winds and the first signs of new growth, pushing through the melting snow. The stronghold, once a place of quiet suspicion toward the human woman who had wandered unexpectedly into its walls, had transformed over the preceding months into something Elena had genuinely come to call home. The cub, no longer the frail, injured creature she had carried through that terrible storm, had grown steadily stronger, his once unsteady legs now carrying him confidently across the courtyard as he chased after older pack members during their training exercises. The pack, following tradition, had recently held a small ceremony marking his survival through his difficult first season, finally giving him the name his parents had never gotten the chance to choose. They called him Ren, a name suggested by one of the pack's elders, meaning small but resilient, a fitting tribute to everything he had already overcome in his short life. Elena watched him now from her place near the courtyard's edge, a soft smile playing across her lips as she observed his clumsy enthusiasm during a training exercise, clearly designed more for entertainment than serious instruction. Beside her, Cale stood with his arms crossed, though the stern authority that had once defined his public demeanor had softened considerably in the months since the confrontation with Thornwood, replaced by something warmer that the entire pack had noticed, even if few dared comment on it directly. "He grows more like his father every day," Cale observed quietly, watching Ren tumble over his own paws before recovering with determined enthusiasm. "I think he takes after his rescuer too," Elena said with a small laugh, "stubborn and refusing to give up, even when things don't go according to plan." Cale glanced at her with an expression of quiet affection that had become increasingly familiar over the preceding months. "I would not disagree with that assessment," he said. Much had changed within the pack since the confrontation on the ridge months earlier. Word of Thornwood's defeat and subsequent accountability before the broader council of packs had spread quickly, and with it, grudging respect for the human woman whose courage had ultimately played a role in exposing the truth behind Darian's death. The suspicion that had once followed Elena through the stronghold's corridors had gradually given way to genuine acceptance, many pack members now greeting her with the same warmth they extended to their own kind. It was during a quiet evening gathering, held in the wide hall where the pack traditionally shared meals and celebrations, that Cale rose from his seat at the head of the table, drawing the attention of everyone present with a formality Elena had rarely seen him display since the tense council meeting on her first night within these walls. Many of you have watched, these past months, as Elena Marsh has become an integral part of this pack, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. She arrived among us as a stranger, carrying nothing but instinct and courage, saving the last of my brother's bloodline at tremendous risk to herself. In the months since, she has proven, time and again, that her place among us was never accidental, but earned through actions few among even our own kind could match. Elena felt her cheeks warm, as every eye in the hall turned toward her, though the expressions she found reflected back were warm, rather than suspicious, genuine affection replacing whatever doubt had once lingered. Cale turned to face her directly, something vulnerable and sincere passing across his features despite the formal setting. "Elena," he said, his voice softening even as it remained audible to the gathered pack. "You saved what mattered most to me before I ever fully understood how much you yourself would come to matter. You have earned not only my trust, but my heart, and I find myself unwilling to imagine a future for this pack, or for myself, that does not include you fully as part of it." Elena's breath caught, as understanding dawned, her heart pounding as Cale knelt before her, the entire hall falling into an anticipatory hush. "I ask you, before this pack, and before everything we have built together since that storm first brought you into my world, to remain here, not merely as a guest, but as my mate, bound to this pack, and to me, for as long as we both shall live." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, joy overwhelming any hesitation that might once have given her pause at the magnitude of the commitment being offered. She had come so far from the frightened, exhausted woman who had collapsed in that snow-covered clearing months ago, carrying a fragile life she barely understood, into a world she never could have imagined existed. Now, surrounded by a family she had never expected to find, offered a future she had never dared hope for, she found her answer coming easily, without hesitation. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion coursing through her. "Yes, I will." The hall erupted into celebration, warm cheers and genuine joy replacing whatever formal tension had gathered during Cale's declaration, pack members rising to offer congratulations, as Cale pulled Elena into an embrace that spoke more powerfully than any words could have conveyed. Nearby, Ren, sensing the celebratory energy though too young to fully understand its significance, bounded excitedly around their feet, adding his own enthusiastic contribution to the joyful chaos filling the hall. In the months that followed, Elena's transformation from unexpected stranger to fully accepted member of Ashbourne Pack continued to deepen, her bond with Cale strengthening steadily as they built a life together that neither could have anticipated on that stormy night, when instinct alone had guided her through the snow toward a small, dying cub in need of rescue. The territory that had once seemed impossibly foreign to her became simply home, its rhythms and traditions woven seamlessly into the life she now shared with the pack that had, against every reasonable expectation, welcomed her fully into its fold. Ren grew alongside them, thriving under the combined care of the uncle who had searched so desperately for him, and the woman whose selfless courage had ensured his survival against impossible odds. He would grow, in time, to know the full story of his rescue, passed down through pack tradition, as a testament to the courage that could exist between two worlds, once thought entirely separate. And Elena, looking back on the winding path that had led her from an ordinary life in a small mountain town to this unexpected family she now called her own, found herself endlessly grateful for the storm that had once seemed like nothing more than a dangerous inconvenience, but which had, in truth, delivered her exactly where she was always meant to be. The Ashbourne Pack, strengthened by alliances renewed and threats overcome, entered a new era under Cale's continued leadership, one built not merely on strength and tradition, but on the understanding that courage and compassion could bridge even the widest divides. And at the heart of that new era stood Elena, once a stranger lost in a storm, now bound permanently to the pack, the king, and the small, resilient cub, whose life she had saved with nothing more than her own unwavering determination and the last of her strength.